I think the first thing we say to ourselves is we want to make our resources available. And the strongest and the most effective resource that we have in the Salvation Army is ourselves. And Christ in us is the person who accepts ourselves. And I think you have to, first of all, before you try to develop some kind of programming or system of care for people, you have to go through some kind of accepting period in your own life of saying that no matter what walks through this door or who walks through this door, I'm going to have some understanding.
AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Some have called it a 20th century plague. Others, a judgment from God. In the past decade, it's become the issue. In the next half hour, we'll explore the subject of AIDS, discovering more about this complex, lethal disease and how the Salvation Army can help those who are affected and those who are or will be at risk. Guiding our exploration will be Major Dr. Herb Rader, Medical Director of the Salvation Army Booth Memorial Medical Center in Flushing, New York. Captain Christine McMillan, Director of a Salvation Army drug-related outreach program in Vancouver, British Columbia, whose everyday ministry brings her into contact with persons with AIDS. And Captain Dr. Ian Campbell, the Salvation Army's International Medical Advisor in London, England. We'll also talk to Captain Stephen Langford, a Salvation Army Corps officer working on the front lines in the Bronx, New York. Since AIDS was first discovered and named in 1983, we've been flooded with information, rumors, and half-truths that have presented us with an abundance of facts, but little understanding. Let's unravel some of the mystery.
Well, the important thing to know about AIDS is that it's a viral disease. Many people have conceived of this as being a mystery, as being a judgment, as being some new disastrous catastrophe that has befallen mankind as a result of their behavior and degeneracy and so on. But AIDS is a viral illness, as polio is a viral illness. As decades ago we feared polio, now we fear AIDS in the same way. But the virus has been identified, and an enormous amount of scientific work has been done to define the virus, to define its genetic makeup, and we have good information about the way in which it's transmitted, even though, because of the particular social problems which are associated with this, we're not sure how prevalent the virus is.
I've called this a devious virus. It is a sneaky virus. It is a diabolically sinister virus. It is different from other simpler viruses. It has a more complex machinery. It has a larger genetic bank. It has more capabilities for deceptive alteration of its protein envelope. It can fool the immune system. It has the ability to penetrate the very cells which you are depending upon to defend yourself from viruses. It has the ability to sneak into your system and shut off the central control. It somehow bribes its way or deceives its way into the center of your defenses.
One thing we know for sure about AIDS is that it is transmitted in certain ways, and people who do not practice certain behaviors are not at risk for AIDS.
AIDS has affected our psyche as a people as no other disease for many centuries. It touches raw nerve endings of human experience. And as we deal with AIDS, we have to consider the real human needs of homosexuals in our community, the plight of IV drug abusers, the needs of impoverished women. the problems that are faced by someone attempting to be reconciled to his family and having to disclose a behavior that was unknown, and the threat of rejection and alienation by the people who could support that person best. The perceived dangers and the real risks that are associated with caring for people with AIDS. The moral dimensions of the advice which we give to control this disease. The conflicts of rights, the human rights of those who are afflicted, the rights of others to a safe workplace and to a safe environment. Issues of responsibility in the area of insurance and who's going to pay for the expensive care of these people. And issues of justice, the inequitable distribution of medical resources that is a part of the medical reality of our time, and discrimination against those who are found to harbor this virus. And then the mentality which is prevalent, unfortunately, many places, that somehow God has decided to begin to judge particular groups of people for their behaviors.
AIDS is a peculiarly relational issue. And as such, because relationships are certainly comprised of our spiritual nature, AIDS is definitely a spiritual entity. I mean, it's something that we have to address in spiritual terms, especially as a Christian organisation, a Christian denomination. Right, so many things are happening. There's an effect on the family, there's an effect on poverty, there's an effect on employment, there's effects on interpersonal relationships within the same family and between different families.
AIDS is an extremely destructive and disruptive illness. People just see their lives just overnight just start to deteriorate and have nothing. Where they, I mean, we've had men that have come in here who are so strong and tough, and, in 6 months, we've seen them lose 60, 70 pounds and just lay in a bed, and they can't even lift their arm. They can't even feed themselves. And, to talk to them about how God is waiting to give them a new home and give them a new body, a body without any pain, a body without any, disgusting, I mean, it's really sad.
AIDS is not the biggest killer in the world. There are other illnesses which have a greater impact throughout the world in mortality and morbidity. For instance, there are at least 100 million cases of malaria in the world, for which there is relatively inexpensive and readily available therapy. There continues to be, again, more than 100 million cases of tuberculosis, and again, there is readily available therapy, which is inexpensive enough to make available to everyone. The number of deaths from these two illnesses will greatly exceed the number of deaths from AIDS in the world. AIDS is transmitted in 3 ways. It's important for people to know that this is a finite and a defined problem. It's transmitted through sexual intercourse. It is transmitted through shared needles by intravenous drug users, and it is spread occasionally from mother to child, perinatal transmission. So the 3 sources are through sex, blood contact, and through perinatal transmission. Those persons who are not drug abusers, who are not exposed through sexual contact, are not at risk.
The AIDS virus, the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, and there are 2 major types, HIV-1, HIV-2, each with many different subgroups, attacks the immunological system in a specific way and weakens its capacity to respond quickly and efficiently to an intruding infection, such as a special form of pneumonia.
This is the Walter Reed classification, and just depicts the balance of power between your body and the AIDS virus. Viruses are not alive, but they certainly affect the machinery of our body. The red line indicates free virus. As soon as this happens in the body as a result of exposure, your body unleashes a tremendous response which for a long time suppresses the amount of free virus in the body, but eventually the T4 cells are destroyed and destroyed and destroyed over time, and the virus prevails, and the body succumbs to one infection or another.
So people die not so much of anything specific, but they die of a constellation of things, diarrheal disease, chest infections, neurological manifestations because they've got infections that are affecting the brain, and so on.
AIDS, unlike a rhinovirus, which someone can sneeze onto you, unlike polio, which occurs or could occur in a contaminated water supply somewhere in the third world, unlike measles, which may spread by droplets through the air and contaminate children in a household, unlike certain kinds of infectious diarrheas that could attack you as you're traveling in South America somewhere. You will not get AIDS that way. You must almost choose the behavior by which you're going to contract this virus. We say that AIDS will not come and get you. You almost have to go and get AIDS. It means that a person chooses to engage in some kind of sexual contact. It means that someone chooses to contact blood through sharing IV drug paraphernalia. Now, there are those, of course, who will contract AIDS in other ways. And certainly the children of persons, young mothers who have the infection do not behave in a certain way to contract that. And prior to 1985, we had the tragedy of hemophiliacs who were infected as a result of contaminated blood. That problem, as I said, has been eliminated, but those persons were exposed in ways that they would never have chosen.
Since the mid-'80s, millions of dollars have been spent in AIDS research. As a result, we have a better understanding of how the virus is transmitted, how it affects the body, and how long it can take for the infected person to show the full symptoms of AIDS. But a cure or vaccine to prevent the disease has yet to be developed, a challenge yet unmet by the medical community. In an age when smallpox, once a worldwide killer, has been largely eliminated, and modern medicine can extend our life expectancy, why can't the researchers find a cure or vaccine for a disease which we now seem to know so much about?
AIDS is a disease for which there is no cure, there is no vaccine.
There are categories of problems that are associated with the development of a vaccine. The first thing we have to do in developing a vaccine is identify the agent. We have done that. Then we have to take that agent, the AIDS virus in this case, the HIV, and find some model, some animal in which we can inject the virus to determine what kinds of responses will occur. And the vaccine ultimately must be developed in some laboratory or animal model that will enable us to prepare a vaccine which is suitable for use in humans. It has been difficult to find the animal model to start with. The human, that is the patient, does develop a very high level of antibodies as a result of infection, but they have not always conferred protection. There is a response, but we do not get so-called, and we do get neutralizing antibodies, but it has not conferred protection so far.
People are dying. And they're not dying by the tens anymore, or even the hundreds. They're dying by the thousands. And most of them have behavior that shows that they haven't accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior. And when you face that, then you have to deal with it. And it hurts. And you've got to decide to do something.
There are few problems in society that touch so many aspects of life as the AIDS epidemic. The problem can no longer be attributed to any specific group. It's something all of us need to confront and deal with on its many levels.
You can't compartmentalize medical and and other aspects of AIDS. It's fused. And so in responding to AIDS, you have to respond in an integrated, fused way. So multidisciplinary approaches are required, and a commitment to integrated AIDS management is required. It means a recognition of at least 5 major disciplines, and that's medical and clinical care of various kinds, education, counselling, pastoral care, and administrative support, organisational development activity. So those 5 things need to be very much in place and happening at the same time.
AIDS is unique in many ways. It is not a medical problem. It has a medical component. AIDS is perhaps one of the most multi-dimensional problems that we have ever faced. And I sometimes think of this as being like a lens, which is forcing the whole society to focus on problems which otherwise they would be very happy to be out of focus and out of sight. But it is forcing us to focus on the reality, the significance of the sexual behavior of our young people.
It's presented as an alarming problem initially. And what it's doing to the population in general, in some ways it's pulling them together to try and opt for a solution. That in itself, I think, has been very, very positive. And it's forced people to be creative, because people feel in themselves that they're going to be affected, that everyone now takes ownership of the problem.
The thing that makes AIDS particularly difficult to work out is that not only do we have to think laterally about AIDS and the way that relationships are affected all around the individual with HIV, but we have to think longitudinally as well. We have to think, if we can, 30 years backwards to when this disease began. Wherever it began from, it doesn't matter. The point is that it took 30 years to get to where it is now in the African continent and the North American continent and elsewhere. We have to think then forward as far as we can, and we have to think 30 years ahead. You know, we have to think what we're likely to be confronted with in the absence of a cure and a vaccine. And even if we did have one, logistical constraints that will still leave a huge problem of transmission potential for a virus coming from different continents of the world where it's not possible to get those cures and vaccines out. You know, North America might well be okay in terms of access to treatment, as it is now, but it's not curative treatment, it's palliative treatment. It's looking at quality of life rather than preserving life.
The thing that hit me about AIDS at first was that God says that to have new life, to be born again, takes 2 things. It takes physical life and spiritual life. If thousands of people die of AIDS, they lose their physical life, so they can't have any spiritual life. So from a spiritual standpoint, you know, the old Salvation Army going for souls and working for those souls and teaching them those souls to accept Jesus Christ, showing them the way, they have to have physical life to do that.
Throughout its history, the Salvation Army has taken for its mandate Christ's command to preach the gospel, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the lonely, and shelter the homeless. As our world changes, our practical application of the gospel also changes to meet new needs. Medical research tells us that what we now see of AIDS is the tip of the iceberg. According to the World Health Organization, the virus that causes AIDS will likely spread to at least 10 million children by the end of the century. In that same length of time, another 10 million children will have lost their parents to the disease. There are thousands of men and women who are already infected, but show no symptoms, and are not aware that their high-risk behavior is spreading the AIDS virus. It can take from 10 to 14 years for the AIDS virus to destroy the body's natural immune system, allowing then for any number of illnesses to multiply and cause death. We will be living with the reality of AIDS for many years. If we take steps now, we as an army of Christ Jesus can be on the front lines of ministry.
When AIDS started, the gay community are the ones that reached out and started dealing with this and started doing acts of compassion that would be associated with the church. and the church did nothing. So one of the problems I think we need to do is the church needs to show its true colors and say whether we are concerned about the sick, whether we, believe what Jesus said when he read from Isaiah that he was called to preach to the poor, to bind the brokenhearted. If that's what we really mean, then we need to do it. And people are looking at us to see whether or not we're going to do anything. And because of the Salvation Army's position in the church is looking at the Salvation Army to say, what are you going to do? What is the Salvation Army going to do?
The Salvation Army's responsibility is, I feel, to live out the role model that is so much a part of our lives. And we look at the person of Jesus Christ. He was not someone who shook his finger at people and said, you have a problem, and I'm telling you this from afar. Do something about it. But as we look at his interaction with people who particularly were ill, or were people who were left out or dropped out of society, he taught them by getting involved with them. And that tells me particularly that people who have problems, one, initially they feel isolated. And so when you look at this problem of AIDS in our community and how people are quick to point the finger because of the way in which it's transmitted, it's important that we want to establish a relationship with people so that they feel comfortable in at least looking at a solution of medication or being cared for.
But there's a sense in which AIDS is the Salvation Army's opportunity for self-discovery, for fulfilling its mission, for meeting expectations in a number of different ways. Just in terms of prevention, the Salvation Army is involved throughout its programs in what I would consider real preventive efforts. Every time we influence young people in our community centers, in our Sunday schools, in our Corps Cadet classes, throughout Salvation Army programs, wherever that may be, when we truly influence them, motivate them, model for them, provide alternatives for them to the kinds of behaviors which lead to exposure to AIDS, we are performing critically important role in prevention.
The fact that recently at a local hospital in the Bronx, in the emergency room, they tested women randomly that weren't there for AIDS, and 23% of them tested HIV positive. Another staggering statistic is that 72,000 children in the next 5 years will be orphaned because of AIDS. So all of these statistics are people that are just having their whole lives destroyed. And from a spiritual standpoint, we say that a lot of people fall to the bottom before they turn around and repent and want to change their lives. And that's what we're finding. A lot of these people are to the point where they are receptive to the gospel. They are receptive to a love that's going to last forever. And they are receptive to the fact that God is waiting to bring them to a place of peace.
Very few diseases have a 100% case fatality rate. Even tetanus has an occasional survivor. Even rabies has an occasional survivor. But to have AIDS, as far as we know, means that eventually arrangements are going to have to be made for death within a short period of time.
Once you get AIDS, it's over. People can drink and drive for years and never have anything happen to them. Or people can say, even if something does happen, they can say, well, I can change my lifestyle. But once you have AIDS, it's over, and you can't make any changes.
When you look at the disease of cancer today, there's more hope for a cure. And yet, at some point, certain kinds of cancer, one realizes that the person that you're looking at is not going to be with you much longer. And so in a chaplaincy way, you begin to talk about loss and grief, and you allow people to express their feelings of loss and grief. In some cases, and I believe in all cases, where there is illness, there's always a sense of guilt. Not because of the disease in particular, but because of what could I have done with the time that I had. And so you allow people to sit back and be able to share not only facts, but also to share feelings. And your response should be to answer facts with facts. If they're asking a question about the nature of the disease or the nature of the problem, then hopefully you respond in a way that's informed, or you make sure that you get the proper information. But if somebody is sitting there weeping with the problem, you're not going to answer them with a fact. You're going to answer them with a feeling. And so it's going at that person's pace at the point at which they feel comfortable, through the stages that they need ultimately to accept what has happened to them, and to let them know that they are accepted in the process.
Since the founding of the Salvation Army, we have been used by God to reach out to those who have fallen to the bottom of life: the alcoholic, the prostitute, the homeless. Today, the lives of many of those people we uniquely serve have become complicated by the AIDS virus. People have looked to the Salvation Army for help before. They're looking now and crying out for the healing touch of Christ. The AIDS epidemic seems frightening on the surface, but with our experience in caring and showing the compassion of Christ, we can provide a ministry to persons with AIDS that no other organization or church can. The Lord sends us out to seek and to save the lost. God's Word tells us that perfect love takes away all fear. As the Salvation Army, we can show that love and calm the fears of a frightened generation.
Many people think that God has suddenly gotten into germ warfare, that God has struck us with lightning now, that Zeus on Olympus is suddenly saying, hey, enough of this behavior, I'm going to get you. But that's not the case. God has said this is a cause and effect world, it's predictable. And when you act in a certain way, there are going to be consequences. Don't be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap.
The fear of contracting AIDS has led some to overreact. Children diagnosed HIV positive have been turned away from school. Men and women have been denied further employment, all from a lack of understanding about the transmission of the human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV. In this program, we will look at how the virus is transmitted, the roots of the behaviors that put people at risk, and how we can prevent the further spread of AIDS. We will hear from Major Dr. Herb Rader, including excerpts from one of his AIDS lectures, and we'll meet Major Charles Gillies, a Corps officer in Fairbanks, Alaska, where even in the remotest parts of North America, AIDS has become an issue. Captain Christine McMillan from Vancouver gives us a unique perspective on the problem from her role as a soldier in the local Corps. And Captain Steve Langford, a Corps officer in the Bronx, speaks from his experiences in AIDS education. We begin with an explanation of how the AIDS virus is transmitted.
It is spread by sex, it is spread by blood, and it is spread by mother to baby. It is a tragedy that the sources of life have become instruments of death. It is spread male to male very efficiently. It is spread male to female less efficiently, but very effectively. It is spread female to male less effectively, and we're not sure at what transmission rate. It is spread through the cultish practice of IV drug abusers to share their needles. Some men say they get a high, not only by the rush of the drug in their blood, but by seeing their partner plunge the needle which has just come out of their arm into hers.
It may not be appreciated that there are over 1 million people in the United States who regularly use intravenous drugs. Now, this is not counting all the people that inhale crack or who take marijuana. We're talking about people who use intravenous drugs and put themselves at risk every time they share a needle, transmission of this virus.
When you get into the vein, you pull blood up into the needle to make sure that you're actually in the vein, and then you shove it down, and then you inject the drug into your vein, and there's always a residue of blood left in there. And then if you take that needle and suck up some more drugs and share it with your neighbor, and there's a whole community. There's a whole. It's a shared experience. That's like a religious experience. It really is. They're sharing something together, and so it becomes very, very important. And the impulse control at that point is real small.
And there is, unfortunately, this tragic spread from mother to baby. Women who are HIV positive or even know they have AIDS do not, as a whole, reduce the number of children they bear. And in New York, we are not only seeing the first baby born to a mother with AIDS, we are seeing now the second children. And the rate of transmission of AIDS to the first baby is 40%. 40% of the children will develop AIDS. All of them are HIV positive when they're born, but only 40% will develop AIDS. The second children, about 60% of them will get AIDS.
In most of the areas, in Baltimore, in Newark, in Detroit, in New York, and San Francisco, where studies have been made of drug abusers and where simple questionnaires have elicited information about, do you know that the virus is transmitted in this way? Yes, I know that. Are you afraid that you may develop AIDS as a result of this? Yes, I have that fear. Are you going to behave differently as a result of this knowledge? Someday.
60% of gay men are also bisexual. They've contracted the disease through one behavior, and they transmit the disease in another way at a time when people think they will not be vulnerable. 70% of gay men have sex with married men and render them infected and capable of infecting their wives, another route into the heterosexual community. These are the routes into the heterosexual community. Anal sex is the most efficient mode of transmission of AIDS.
If you run out in front of a car and that car hits you, you can't say, I was a victim. You can say, I chose to run out in front of that car, and I got hit by that car, and he couldn't do anything else but because he was moving so fast. You can't just say, I didn't know because I ran out in front and wasn't going to get hurt, so God's at fault. Well, the same thing happens with AIDS. If you know what it's going to what causes, the virus itself, you know the behaviors, and you put yourself at risk for those behaviors, you are at risk physically in your life, in your own life.
But addictive behaviors are powerful. And if someone, for example, finds it more important to meet that need of intimacy, and the only way they know how is to quickly go out and get a fix of sexual activity, then that becomes more important than the consequences.
The factors that lead to addictions are numerous, but there seem to be common threads.
If someone's involved in many, many relationships, then we have women in this facility, and I know men who are what are called sexually active, but also sexually addicted. And the thing that's destroyed in them is the lack of knowing what intimacy is. And so in some ways that kills their spirit, and that kills their ability to know what family is and to know what relationship is.
I'm not sure, and I tend to believe that it is not the drug itself that's hooking them so much, and that's not the most difficult part of a cure. I think it is that the conditions, the way in which they view themselves, the lack of ability to think about the future that causes them to act in a certain way. And therefore, I think that one of the strategies which the Salvation Army must pursue is to study carefully the real effectiveness of its interventions when it deals with substance abuse treatment.
Despite ongoing educational programs about the transmission of AIDS, there are still myths concerning how AIDS is contracted. The truth is, the AIDS virus is present in body fluids, usually blood, semen, or vaginal fluid. For the virus to enter the body, these fluids must enter the bloodstream, either through direct contact, as is the case with IV drug users, through a wound or tear in the skin or mucous membrane, and sexual intercourse.
If you could conceive of the AIDS virus being a little ball of some sort, it has on its surface certain molecules which we have been identified and have been labeled by the arcane designation GP120. And if you could conceive of that ball actually being a little piece of Velcro, there are sites, receptors in the body which have a protein configuration, which has the arcane designation of CD4, which will act in the way that the counterpart of Velcro acts, so that GP120 only adheres to certain receptors in the body. It so happens that those receptors are on internal surfaces only, so that if a virus attaches or attempts to attach somewhere on the external surface of my body, even on my tongue, even on my eye, or somewhere on my hand, or gets into my mouth, it is unlikely that that virus can adhere, can cause me any trouble, because there is not the counterpart, there is not the receptor to stick to. Where the reason that certain kinds of behaviors result in a high degree of transmission is because the virus finds the receptor. The receptors are plentiful in certain kinds of, within the blood, for instance, so that whenever there is trauma, whenever there is direct injection, the AIDS virus has no problem in finding the so-called CD4 lymphocytes, the particular type of T4 lymphocyte that has the receptor, and that takes place. The AIDS virus will get into a lymphocyte, turn the machinery of the lymphocyte into a factory for producing other AIDS viruses and then kill that lymphocyte. So that what is happening to the immune system, which is designed to protect the body, it's being turned into a factory to make more AIDS viruses and losing its capacity to defend the body.
Although the medical background of transmission helps us understand how the HIV enters and attacks the body, some still have nagging doubts.
When we talk about the effectiveness of transmission or the likelihood of transmission, we have to have a certain amount of virus. It has been written, and many will be aware from newspaper articles and other sources, that there may be virus in tears or in earwax or in saliva or in urine or in feces. That is technically true. But the amount, the virulence, the ability of the virus in those secretions to cause illness in another person, to be transmitted, is minuscule. And in fact, when we observe what actually happens, transmission does not occur that way.
Perhaps Cindy Flockmeyer, Salvation Army Social Services Director in Miami, gave us the simplest answer to the question, how do you not get AIDS?
We do not get AIDS through hugging, kissing on the cheek, holding hands, crying.
That gives us a quick overview, but there are some specific questions that need to be answered, especially when we are concerned with the ongoing work in the Salvation Army. By understanding how AIDS is transmitted, we can now understand how safe our working environment and our communities really are.
If AIDS were transmitted easily, if AIDS were a contagious disease, we could certainly detect this in our healthcare facilities. We would certainly turn up transmission incidents of transmission among the caregivers of patients at home who have AIDS, but in fact, it is not happening. The greatest interest perhaps was in whether insects could transmit this illness, and there was quite a bit of media attention given to the situation in Belglades, Florida. What was discovered eventually was that although there were a lot of mosquitoes, there was also a large gay community there and considerable amount of intravenous drug abuse. And while the mosquito, for instance, could actually withdraw blood from your body, which would theoretically contain the virus, there is no life cycle in the mosquito, so that it is not then it goes into the mosquito's stomach but is not passed out again from the mosquito. And in fact, empirically, no transmission has occurred this way.
So any kind of touching outside the body, even a hug or a kiss on the cheek, those kind of things won't give you AIDS. Going in and cleaning up after somebody's eaten won't give you AIDS. Normal everyday behavior you can't get AIDS from. You get AIDS from sharing drug needles and having sexual intercourse, and very slightly, remotely from blood transfusions.
Until the virus was defined and tests were made available to test for the antibody against AIDS, there was a possibility of actually being contaminated as a result of a blood transfusion. That risk has now been reduced nearly to zero as a result of very fine screening that takes place in all of the blood banks. And of course, there is no risk associated with donating blood.
If somebody's bleeding here, we don't go and deal with them without putting on rubber gloves. But it's not the fear of AIDS, it's the fear of hepatitis. So we put on rubber gloves, we deal with them. When we're done, we make sure we wash our hands with a solution that's going to kill the germs and things like that. And if I have a cut on my finger, I don't go and stick it in somebody else's finger that's bleeding. Like we used to be blood brothers when we were kids. I don't even know if anybody ever does that anymore, but we don't tell people to, if they do that, then they can get AIDS, possibly, if they do a lot of sharing of blood.
The AIDS virus may contact your skin, but soap and water will take care of that problem. Could even splash in your eye, but again, a little water would take care of that. The AIDS virus has to get into your body, and you have a lot of choices about whether that's going to happen or not. HIV is transmitted in certain ways, and it is not transmitted through food handlers, period.
The choice of whether or not someone gets involved in high-risk behavior can have life or death consequences. For the most part, AIDS is a consequence of specific behaviors. The choice of the behaviors themselves may be a consequence of other factors. Equipping our young people to make the correct choices is the key to AIDS prevention.
I don't think it's old-fashioned to ask for ourselves, to demand for ourselves, and to ask for others that we accept biblical standards. I call these a manufacturer's instructions. When it doesn't work, when you can't get it to go together right, when you're not getting the performance out of it that you expected, read the directions. We came with instructions, and God is not silent and has not put us here as some kind of an interesting experiment in animal behavior to see what we would do and have laughs from time to time. We somehow came out of his loving plan, and we came with the directions, and God has always laid down guidelines for the way to live. And it has always involved relationships, and it has always demanded, because we're free moral agents, that we live with responsibility and accountability. And God has always said, I take you seriously, and when you do this, these will be the consequences.
I realize that all of our kids are in a very permissive society. We are less so up here than we would be in LA, and I am so thankful to the Salvation Army to put me up here at this time because of that. But we, via the TV and via the, through the movies, via the school education and the peer pressure and the peer standards, we're in a very permissive society when it comes down to sexual behaviors.
We need to deal with AIDS and with sexually transmitted diseases and with drug abuse in a broad context of teaching life skills, of teaching responsibility, of self-esteem, of confidence in the future, of discipline and self-control, of investing in a lifetime. And in order to make those things credible and desirable, young people have to see models of integrity, of fidelity, of happy, well-adjusted family life, and we're going to have to address deficiencies in those areas too. All of us who are involved in influencing young people are going to have to overcome some of our reticence, some of our embarrassment. We're going to have to reveal ourselves as we really are. We're going to have to face our own behavior problems and our own hang-ups, and we're going to have to become effective in motivating young people, in instilling in them not only knowledge, but the adequate strength of character, of spiritual motivation, of spiritual resources, which will enable them to survive in today's environment.
Too much has been done by the church to talk about sexuality from a negative standpoint. You know, don't have sex, don't do this, don't do that, don't use contraceptives. And what we're trying to do is to mold the whole picture of what life is, and that one of God's gifts in life is that of our sexuality. And a part of that is our virginity. When we talk about abstinence in our AIDS education program, specifically, we tell them that abstinence is God's plan, and a monogamous relationship is God's plan. And sex is beautiful, sex is fulfilling, sex is wonderful, sex is all of these positive things if it's in God's plan and in God's framework.
Maybe our Sunday school lessons have been too benign. Maybe our Core Cadet lessons have been just slightly outside the realm of their real concerns, and maybe we need to deal with those issues. Maybe we need more assertiveness training. Maybe we need to face the realities of their life more realistically and help them how to learn how to say no. Strategies for coping with the pressures of a date. How to deal with the urges of your powerful hormonal surges. These are things which kids do need to have skills.
probably 3 years ago, 2020 had a show on about AIDS. And I sat and watched it, and they talked about how, you know, people get AIDS, how people are dying of AIDS. And it really hit me that when, even in the church, when we realized that statistics say that 50% of teenagers in the church are sexually active, that meant that half the kids in our congregation are sexually active and have the opportunity or put themselves in the position to get the virus. And, you know, 1 or 2 simple mistakes could cost my daughter her life, or could cost a junior soldier or a senior soldier in my corps their life. Then it became a real pressing issue that we had to do something. And even our junior soldiers had to be talked to about AIDS and about abstinence and about the risks that were involved.
In all of our efforts at education and prevention, one of the best, anything that is good for to strengthen the family is a positive good for our society, and anything that undermines the family. And those things might be our tolerance for certain kinds of entertainment and our compromise with respect to the kinds of behaviors which are apparently condoned in the media and on television. Those things tend to break down because we begin to accept certain kinds of lifestyles. We begin to become immune to what would have jarred us just years ago. They break down the family. They I think, cause us to behave in certain ways that are not healthy.
The question is when people come up through the ranks of junior soldiership or Corps cadets, what are they learning from married couples in the Corps? Are they willing to share their own marriage to the extent that they talk about the love that they have for one another? Is there an openness when we talk about the love that we have for one another, so that when a problem is in view, that we can also share that as well and get help for each other? And so the important thing is that people who are in a sense a point of influence, married couples, parents, should be talking about their marriages.
Once we lose a solid family base, of which teaches rights and wrongs, we've got some problems in our whole society. Because as I say, when I marry somebody, God doesn't say what a marriage is. He just says be married, and marriages are the basis of society. Families are the basis of, and in the marriage you form the family. And the families are the basis of society. And if families are disintegrating, your society is going to do the same thing. And this is part of it. And so how do you get them? It's a high-risk group behavior. It's high-risk behaviors. And if your good, solid families are able to teach and model solid biblical lifestyles, then we'd have a good, we wouldn't have the tendency for this thing to be as pervasive as it is.
But the breakup of the family is coming as a result of infidelity to oneself, infidelity to one's children, infidelity to one's spouse. Then the children are developing in their own mindset a role of victim. That then, as I said before, leads them to seek other avenues for a feeling of intimacy. And when we look at our ads today on the TV, and when we think about intimacy automatically, very often people think of sexual involvement, sexual activity.
Is AIDS related to the breakdown of the family? Insofar as we've lost control of our children, insofar as the home is no longer the center of authority for how we should live, insofar as young people no longer look to their parents as models of how they want to pattern their own lives, insofar as the word at home is not as credible and relevant as it once was, insofar as the manufacturer's instructions are no longer taught when you rise up and when you sit down and when you come in and when you go out. No longer somehow we're not sending our young people out with the armor that homes should fortify their young people with.
The Apostle Paul tells us through his letter to the Ephesians to put on the whole armor of God before entering into battle. The war against AIDS is a spiritual battle in which we are all at war. It's not only our youth that need to be educated and protected, but all Salvationists, young and old, need to hold firm to the Word of God, or as Major Rader calls it, the manufacturer's instructions. Only as we live our lives in the light of Scripture and in the love of Jesus Christ can we hope to minister to those who are dealing with the AIDS virus and live lives that will be pleasing to God. Every day, 365 days a year, the Salvation Army welcomes through its doors men, women, and children from all backgrounds. Among those we serve are people with AIDS and those who are HIV positive and show no symptoms. But the majority are people who are at risk of getting AIDS. They don't identify themselves that way. Many may not know they carry the disease or that their behavior puts them at risk of being infected. AIDS is affecting the Salvation Army because it is touching the lives of people we help. With the right information, we can reach out to those who are infected or could be infected and help them prolong their lives. In this program, we'll look at how we can effectively deal with the reality of AIDS in our institutions and CORE. Eunice Swires is responsible for the Army's youth shelter in Atlanta.
These teenagers are a high-risk group because of their behaviors. It's not who they are, but what they do.
Major Charles Gillies is the Corps officer in Fairbanks, Alaska. He is also responsible for the Corps-operated shelter and drug treatment program and its AIDS education program with 5 target groups.
The intermediate drug users, it was the gay, bisexual men. Our third population was the prostitutes, and we've got our prostitution body here. And in the fourth, there are 5 groups. The fourth group was the street kid, and the fifth was the Native American, Native Alaskan.
The Army's first shelter for men with AIDS was established in Miami, where Cindy Flockmeyer is the social services director.
We're dealing with both homosexuals and IV drug abusers, and a very small percentage of heterosexual transmission.
Captain Debbie Wilson is responsible for an outreach program to street people, women in crisis, and drug treatment in Vancouver.
I remember one time in particular we were having an open air in Pigeon Park, which is the Skid Row Park, where a lot of people would sit on the benches. There was a fight erupted, and there was this man who had a cut lip. And I remember during the open air going to him, talk to him, and dabbing him. And the thought, you know, at that point, I don't have gloves, I don't have anything other than this piece of paper. what am I going to do? I cleaned his mouth off anyway. But that was the first time and the only time that I've been in that situation where I thought, he's very high risk, and what am I going to do? And my feeling was, you know, the compassion comes first, that here's an individual in need, a man who's just been beaten, and here we are preaching on the street corner, you know, that God cares for them, so let's put it into action.
In our previous programs, we have learned that AIDS is transmitted through unprotected sexual intercourse, the sharing of needles by intravenous drug users, and to unborn children by an infected mother. What makes the HIV so insidious is that a person can be infected and not know.
When a person is first infected, they may develop an infection which is like the flu, like infectious mono. It's inconsequential, may make them feel a little ill. It's short-lived. And after that, they feel perfectly all right. Perfectly all right. They're just not aware of any illness at all. And that period of latency, of dormancy of the virus, a period when the immune system is still intact. It's under attack. It's still intact. But, you know, though the virus is making its own advances, they are capable of coping with this virus. There's more antibody than there is free virus, and the virus is all in cells, and it's suppressed, essentially.
This means that anyone who has been engaging in high-risk behavior, who comes to us for whatever reason, may be HIV positive. The question then arises, are there any visual clues to help us?
The caseworker, the trained caseworker, would visually probably be able to tell if the client's using drugs on a regular basis, whether it would be the needle tracks in their arms or their fidgety behavior or what they're asking for and the aggressiveness of what they're asking for. So just with body language or behavior, you would be able, a good caseworker would be able to pick up what the client may be drug addicted.
If a person is drug addicted and using intravenous drugs, he or she is involved in high-risk behavior and may or may not be HIV positive. But as we know, drug use is only one way to get AIDS.
Another fella was in our drug treatment program, and he was without a place to stay, so he ended up in our shelter. And he was sicker than a dog, and he had been for a long time. Physically, because he was an IVDU and had been on the streets for years, had lived the whole scene up and down the coast, LA, San Francisco, Seattle, and then back up here, Fairbanks guy, a young man. We thought for sure he was sick now. We thought for sure that he was HIV positive. Tested him, and he wasn't.
As Major Gillies discovered, there is no way to know whether someone is HIV positive without conducting a blood test. But people who are infected with the AIDS virus may display certain symptoms which would cause our staff to advise testing. These are, number one, complaints of swollen glands, usually in the neck, armpits, or groin area. Number two, extreme fatigue. Number three, weight loss not related to diet, exercise, or other illness. Number four, persistent diarrhea or loose stools. Number five, cough and shortness of breath that lasts over a length of time and seems not related to a common respiratory illness. Number six, unexplained skin rashes or discolorations, bumps or lumps occurring under the skin, inside the mouth, nose, eyelids, or rectum that do not go away within 2 weeks. Number seven, night sweats and chills not related to flu or other illnesses that last over a period of time. Even though these symptoms may appear and the person should be referred for medical attention, it still doesn't necessarily mean that a person is HIV positive. The only way to find out is through a blood test.
The reason why we need to say no, that we can't identify a person, is because some of our young people think that they can protect themselves from the possibility of transmission by asking a casual question or assuming certain things about another person, and that they can have a sexual partner and feel confident that they are not at risk because the person does not appear ill. That just isn't the case. And there is no way to know or to be sure about another person that there is no infection.
If we don't know if a person has AIDS, then it becomes important for us to undertake two courses of action. The first is education and intervention. Medical authorities tell us that the more exposure one has to the virus through high-risk behavior, the greater the chance for contracting AIDS, and the less resistance the body has to its devastating effects. So education and intervention become top priority.
When a child comes here and we try to go through the AIDS seminar with them, we first give them a pretest. So we're able to find out what information do they know about AIDS and about HIV. Then we go through the seminar where we help them to learn about AIDS and the HIV, and then we give a post-test. So we're able to see exactly what the child has learned through the seminar. But you know that behavior is habit forming, so sometimes it's very hard to take the knowledge that we teach them and put it into practice.
We work with the children, the homeless children in our Women and Children's Shelter. We do drug-free kids, and in that, very sensitively, we deal with the AIDS problem if the children are in grade school. We do classes with the adults at night when we have all the ladies in the shelter, and we talk very openly and freely about AIDS and prevention. At the men's shelter, we have education classes. We have a speaker come in, and the speaker gives a lecture, and then it's opened up to questions, and then there's informal interplay.
In this project, we always stress abstinence. Abstinence is a good idea, especially in today's society. You never know who you're sleeping with. You never know what they have, and they may not know it. And this is why AIDS is such a dangerous disease. It's a very silent killer. Unless you have the tests, you will not know. You do not know, or unless you start getting symptoms. And so, of course, we stress abstinence from a very realistic point of view. But knowing these children, we also have to be realistic in knowing that even though we give them the opportunity to be abstinent, or we try to encourage them to stop having sex now until they're married, we also discuss the fact that if you use a condom today, you're doing better than you were yesterday if you weren't using a condom. So we have to be realistic in knowing that sometimes these kids are not going to stop their behavior.
We give the ladies the message that they need to be responsible about their bodies, to be careful about what they're doing out in the streets. They're out in the streets, if they're doing drugs, the problems that occur from doing drugs, trying to guide the lady into the type of clinics or rehabilitation centers that can help them work on getting off of drugs if that's the behavior they have. If the woman's prostituting and that's her sole means of support, we educate. We try to, again, guide them into some type of a counseling setting where they can feel good about themselves and not have to go out in the street. Employability skills so that they can go out and get a regular job.
We talk about how to clean your needles if you're using intravenous drugs. We talk about abstinence, of course, which is our number one idea. We stress abstinence. Then we also talk about alcohol and drugs. We talk about how that blurs your thinking when you go to a party and you're drinking or you're taking drugs. and how that will get you into some trouble sometimes because you're not sober and not able to think clearly. So we talk about the fact that alcohol and drugs do play a part in your behavior.
I can conceive of a situation in which I would actually tell someone how to sterilize their needle with bleach. It might be necessary in some of our institutions because of the particular clientele, the group of people that we're trying to reach there. We have to give them ways to clean the works. We might have to tell other people who are on the street, we're dealing with them all the time. Make sure your customers use these condoms. It would not be beyond my sense of propriety to make sure that girls had condoms to use.
Part of the education prevention program, even though nobody had the intestinal fortitude, is that the word, the guts to write out saying this is an expectation that in the program will be bleach and condoms. There was an expectation by the state to be teaching safer sex and to be teaching how to clean your works. Well, that runs in direct contradiction to treatment, which says don't shoot up, but if you do, here's how you clean your works. You know, those issues, and those were very pronounced and profound as we both in our core council and then the advisory board and advisory committees as struggling with. If we do this, if we do the bleach and if we do the condoms, are we encouraging people in their behavior? Or are we trying to teach them preventive measures? Or are we trying to teach them morality? You know, what are we teaching?
What do you do when somebody's overboard? What do you do when somebody has violated everything that you wanted to tell them to do? You throw them a life preserver. You go after them. That's what the Salvation Army does. We are dealing with many populations who put themselves at risk. They're just not doing what we want them to do, and they won't change and they won't stop. I think that the moral thing to do, the moral imperative, the spiritually correct thing to do is to do what Jesus always did. He went after them. He takes the initiative and he does the needful. He goes to seek and to save. And sometimes saving involves not a sermon, but a lifesaver. And we do need to throw to people who are putting themselves at risk the means whereby they can preserve their lives long enough that we can get them into some other group, get them into the boat, get them ashore. Now, this means, in this context of AIDS, that we may have to tell people about how to protect themselves from transmission because the things they're doing are putting them at risk.
You know, I've had people, and some of them I lost right in our core here, whose understanding is that if they're involved in sin, you beat them over the head with the Bible. You proclaim Christ to them. You tell them the good news of Jesus Christ. If they don't accept it, you wash your hands and go to the next place. The next person, well, my concept of this is, yeah, their behaviors may be wrong, but God still loves them. And so we still continue to demonstrate His love. You support them. You talk to them about the AIDS virus. You take the test. You talk to them about the post, you know, the results, and you talk about behavioral change and how to minimize the risk as a demonstration of Christ's love.
We want to steer them away from the crack houses, to get them away from those neighborhoods that they're used to going into and the friends that they've made. You've got a big problem because the lady that's going into the crack house, those are her friends in there. That's her base of friendship. So you need to really start with a lot of new things, new friends, new support base.
We hope that all of our educational efforts are resulting in modification of behavior. There is an area in which this is definitely true. In the gay community in San Francisco, the wide dissemination of accurate information about the transmission of AIDS and the effectiveness of condoms in preventing the transmission of AIDS had a dramatic effect in the transmission rates.
Well, as a Christian, of course, our whole focus is that the answer is Christ, that we make a commitment to Him, and that through our personal commitment to Him that He can help us be strong. He can help us change our behavior. He can help us to live a clean life. And so we stress that, yes, in our project with the kids.
Since AIDS has become a highly visible public health issue, hundreds of community-based organizations have established programs which can complement the ongoing work of the Army and provide assistance with educational programs.
We don't have all the answers for all the needs, and there are experts out there who can be of tremendous support, and we work very well together. And what we have found is just empowered us as opposed to losing anything. We actually gain that much more expertise.
Our responsibility is to know the community and to be part of the community and to be able to pick up the telephone and call someone that can help. That's our responsibility. Our responsibility is to take an active interest in the community, and when the client's asking, to be able to provide some type of assistance.
I believe in networking 100%. I believe in it because I don't think we're going to be able to solve this problem without networking with other agencies. It's a big problem, a lot of people, and I think that we need to be out there. People like the Red Cross, they have excellent materials on AIDS. They have videos, they have brochures, and they have speakers who will come out and talk to you. Your local AIDS society, people who will volunteer to come out and talk to your groups on AIDS or send you information. There's a hotline, national hotline that you can call to get information. So there are all kinds of informative organizations who can get you the materials you need.
But within a city, and this is what's going to happen most of the time, I think that an officer who finds himself in a particular city certainly ought to, first of all, link himself with the local pastoral association, whatever the ministerial association, whatever that may be. He should link himself thoroughly with all the social service agencies that there may be. He should find out about the political structure, about the school system, and about everything that he possibly can. And then today, he must also find out what network of services are available in support of persons who have AIDS or who are HIV positive.
Education and intervention for ourselves and our clients is our first goal. Once the information has been presented, we then need to encourage anyone who has been involved in high-risk behavior to have their blood tested so that they will know whether or not they are HIV positive. Testing is our second goal.
Without knowing your HIV status, if you are a substance abuser, if you have had contact with someone who might be infected, you need to know whether you're infected. Why? So you can live a lifetime of fear and dread of impending death? No, because you want to act in a responsible way toward people you care about. And because early treatment is effective. And because change of lifestyle will dramatically improve the quality and length of your life. And because you don't want to put yourself at risk for other infections. If the AIDS virus gradually impairs the ability of your immune system to fight infections, you don't want to put yourself at risk for those infections. Changing your lifestyle can lengthen your life.
And this guy, when he got his test back, we were about pulling him off the ceiling because he thought he was too. And he went out to all of his friends and to all of his acquaintances and his drug buddies and told them, go in and get the test. Go in and get it. It's freeing to know that you're not.
So there is a message for people. Overcome your fears and take your head out of the sand and act in a responsible way and get tested. But I don't want to get tested. I'll lose my job, I'll lose my house, I'll lose my friends, I'll lose everything. I'll lose my ability to cope. I won't be able to stand this reality. It will be difficult to know that. That is going to be one of the most terrible messages that anyone is going to hear.
A lot of the children have not been tested. So, of course, just looking at them, you're not going to be able to see that they're HIV positive. So we have to guard ourselves and protect ourselves in the best way we know how. First of all, we provide confidentiality to all the teenagers. If they come and talk to us about their fears, or if they do know that they're HIV positive, we do not discuss this outside of the door or the walls. We make sure that they understand that there's a confidentiality factor.
I think that the main concern that you would have in an ARC is whether or not you should test all the clients who come in. and I would say categorically that you should not test the clients in order to attempt to protect yourself from that. We should have intake policies which do not require mandatory testing. It will not do us any good. We will have information which will be difficult to deal with rather than information which is helpful to us.
Although the reported incidences of AIDS is increasing, it's safe to say that the majority of those who seek our assistance are not HIV positive. How do we protect ourselves and those we serve from the risk of HIV infection? Captain Dr. Ian Campbell of International Headquarters gives us the simple answer.
Disinfectant facilities, if you should need a bit of disinfectant to be applied to materials and to people if a lot of blood happens to be spilled around the place, and if people get blood on their hands or other parts of the body, that needs to be washed off with standard, cheap form of disinfectant. I mean, the AIDS virus doesn't survive in the open air very long, a matter of seconds or minutes, and we're safe from that point of view.
We need to become wise in developing appropriate protocols for dealing with a lot of different situations. Some institutions want to have an AIDS policy, others do not, because they feel that the existing policies apply to the AIDS situation. One of the things which we must learn probably would be what are called universal precautions. We may have to learn that there are certain ways of doing things which are not only prudent, but protect us from criticism more than from the risk of infection.
So we try to, first of all, talk with people about their risky behaviors. We try to keep the place clean. We try to keep the boys and the girls separate. We try not to encourage sexual contact in any way with the other clients, so that we're protecting the other clients as well as the client who may be advancing towards another client.
Let's say that we have a daycare center where a child might be infected. I think that when the teachers in that center are dealing with the urine and feces from the children, the potty sessions that take place, it would probably be a wise thing for them to wear these disposable gloves. Is that actually mandatory? Are you at risk? No, it is more an issue of avoiding criticism, and it's more aesthetic than a strict infection control procedure. But it's becoming a standard of care, and so it probably would be well to do that.
We've tightened up in terms of cleanliness to make sure the place is clean and everything is clean, and if there's needles, they're disposed of. We've tightened up and made sure that there's good controls there.
What we have found, and the work goes beyond what we've mentioned here, is that food handlers do not put others at risk, and therefore no special efforts need to be made, except those prudent precautions associated with injury or blood or someone who is acutely ill.
We encourage the staff to stay healthy. We encourage that the staff take care of themselves, work 8 hours a day, not come in every Saturday and Sunday. We encourage the staff to eat 3 meals a day, to exercise, to have diversions besides work, because if the staff's not healthy, then they can't take care of the client. And they have to be healthy physically, emotionally.
Maybe I should say as a precaution, when the city or the state mandates a certain standard, the Salvation Army must always adhere very strictly. When there are codes, guidelines, protocols, we are obliged to be aware and to implement them. Sometimes they will go beyond absolute scientific necessity. We will still follow them because we do not want to be subject to criticism by our state surveyors for violations of code.
Working with high-risk groups gives new meaning to the old phrase, soup, soap, and salvation. We can provide food, we can provide a clean, safe environment for both our employees and our clients, and most importantly, These can be packaged in a practical statement of God's love providing a temporal salvation. How we treat those who come to us for help is a vibrant witness to how God looks at each of us. He takes us with our sin, our failings, and deficiencies, and through the power of the Holy Spirit, transforms our lives. That's the attitude and message we need to convey to the world at our doorstep.
I was a drug user for 27 years. I used to shoot up a lot of cocaine and heroin.
You don't know how long you want to live. You don't know if you want to live for 6 months, for a year.
I want to live. And I want to live clean and a little longer.
But I think that the church is going to be relegated to irrelevance if we do not take advantage of the enormous challenges which this disease poses today.
William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, once charged his soldiers to go for souls and go for the worst. He didn't say wait for souls, but he insisted that we take the initiative. That challenge is ours today, and especially relevant when put into the context of caring for persons with AIDS.
We have already established throughout the world a sense of trust, that people feel relatively comfortable in coming to the Salvation Army and talking to them about their needs. And I believe in North America we're able to specialize enough now that we also not just bring our, quote, religion, but we have also the professionalism that is attached to applying practical Christianity that can really address the issues of the inner person.
I think it's well for us to know that although AIDS is not the biggest medical problem in the world, it is going to be with us. It is not going to go away. It is not going to overwhelm us, but it is not going to go away. It is not going to engulf the world, but it is going to remain a major problem. There is no way that we are going to be able to avoid confronting and attempting to contain this problem. We do need to gear up to care for the growing number of people who will need our services.
One of those services may be counseling, either formally or just providing a listening ear. Because with the diagnosis of AIDS comes the reality of a terminal disease. The days are numbered. We have to be ready to help the person work through their feelings. Most will experience various stages in accepting the inevitable: denial, anger, bargaining with God, grieving, and finally acceptance. These can occur in any order and are accompanied by many emotions: guilt, shame, and rejection, for example.
If we find that there is someone who is HIV positive, then we try to do a lot of one-on-one. We make sure that they get into some classes, some seminars on HIV positive and on AIDS, where they can learn about what's happening to their bodies.
Basically, it's dealing with fear. From what I've seen from talking to the people that I've known that have tested HIV positive. The fear of not knowing and what's going to happen, you know, the fear of not being able to live a normal life. From the day they find out they're HIV positive, their whole life changes. And they have to deal with all of this.
I think people with AIDS need support and a guarantee that no matter who they are and what's going on, that there will be people there who can be with them through the whole experience that they're going to go through, of acceptance of them as an individual, not necessarily the lifestyle, but that they are important, and to work through some of the issues that need to be worked through.
One young man was HIV positive. We've lost contact with him, don't know where he is now. But he was HIV positive and was identified about 1.5 years ago as that, and angry and on our streets and saying, if I'm going to go, I'm going to take as many as I can with me. And didn't change his behavior other than become more sexually involved.
I had a girl here who was HIV positive, and she, first of all, went through a very depressed state. My life is over, why not end it now? Somewhat suicidal. She didn't commit suicide, but had thought about it on several occasions. Why continue to live? The other thing was she was embarrassed. She was ashamed. She felt guilty. She felt like she didn't deserve this, that she had a right to live, that she had a right to grow up and to have a family and to have a job. She went through a denial process. I don't have it. I don't believe it. It's not me. It won't happen to me.
If the client is denying AIDS and doing high-risk behavior, then we need to be able to confront that client and to say, you have AIDS. You can't go out in the community. You can't shoot drugs. You can't have sex. You're going to hurt other people. And try to reduce that behavior. It's all part of the denial. That's all part of the anger. And you need to catch it so that they don't go out and so they don't hurt other people because of what they're going through.
Basically, that's the spiritual side of that is, as far as I'm concerned, is to try to give to them some sense of hope and some sense of assurance that they still do have life and life more abundant, and that with some changes in their behavior, they can continue to lead a normal life, and that even when or if they do get AIDS, full-blown AIDS, then, you know, in the long run, they're all right. God's going to take care of them. You know, they're going to spend eternity in heaven with Jesus Christ.
It's not easy to die when you're 20. It's not easy to die at any point in your life. But it's not easy when you're young, when you are looking back at a life when you've never had anything good. Maybe your parents were drug users. Maybe you've lived in poverty all your life. Or if you're gay, you've dealt with all the problems of being gay. And now the ultimate insult to me is that because of my behavior, because of my poverty, because of whatever, here I am at 23, 25, 30, and I'm dying. And what do I have to show for it? You spoke to the one man who said, for 27 years I did drugs, and now I'm clean. Something that I hear people say all the time, I'm clean and I will die clean. And I think that says a whole lot about the insult to a person because of what AIDS is and what it does to them and how they've lived.
To help us minister to persons with AIDS, we need to understand how the disease shows itself in its later stages. For most persons who are HIV positive, they may have lived a number of years without any symptoms. The natural immune system would react as it would to any disease by creating antibodies to fight it. But because the AIDS virus is resistant and keeps duplicating, there comes a time when there is more HIV than antibody. Therefore, As the immune system slowly breaks down, infections and disease that would normally be fought by the body slowly inflict their damage, and the person now suffers from the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS.
Some of the patients develop a cancer which has its own effects, creates its own wasting of the body. Other people will have a wasting disease which is common in Africa, where they don't have an infection or a cancer but just seem to waste away. Other patients, and the most common way in which AIDS shows itself is through infections, a whole host of infections. The most common one is a parasite that would not affect you because you have immune competence, but which causes a severe pneumonia, which is commonly fatal, and which is even on the first episode, and which is the most common cause of death. And then there would be a fourth group of patients who develop a progressive dementia.
One of the most important things about that shelter is someplace they can go eat, gain weight, so that they don't look like they have AIDS, which means I feel better about myself, and then we can start working on all the other problems. It's the same concept of I can't do heavy counseling until the client's tummy's full, the soup, soap, and salvation. It's the same in the PWA house. You feed them in, have them start looking okay. If they've lost their hair and they have patches of hair from chemotherapy, get them a haircut. First you have to start on making me look good and make me feel good. And then you start working on all the other problems. It's easier. Then they help you work on their own problems. Otherwise you have a man laying in bed depressed, can't help himself, and won't let us help him.
Well, since I arrived, I've gained weight. I got a new wardrobe of clothes that I didn't have, a few extra pounds. I feel cleaner, got a little more life in me.
In all instances, there just seems to be a general deterioration as the disease progresses. It's tragic, it's difficult to watch, it must be terrible to experience. There is loss of control, blindness is common, loss of control of bowel function and bladder function is common. So that this disease, unfortunately, has all of the worst characteristics of many illnesses.
They don't make any difference if my family is not. The only thing that's going to happen is feel sorry for me. And I don't want to feel sorry for me. I want to fight with the disease. Now I hear they have some new stuff. Maybe they cure the AIDS. Maybe I make it. Maybe they never know I have AIDS. What good is it? The mother to telling I have AIDS, I want to die, maybe in 1 year, maybe in 2 years. All she want to do is cry. I'm suffering. And I don't need to make that.
People ought not to die in some far place. They ought to die at home. They ought to die in the embrace of their family. They need caregivers every day. They need to be touched, held, loved, consoled. They need to be comforted. They need to be supported.
If the family's having a lot of problem accepting the diagnosis, we can bring the whole family unit in and discuss it and work with the family so that they understand what's going on, so that they understand that they're not going to get AIDS because their brother or their son is coming to visit, that the children in the house will not get AIDS. So it's educating the family as well as pulling the family back together.
These are things which we may not be able to do ourselves, but perhaps we can encourage. Maybe through our Missing Persons Bureau, we can bring a son who has been away from home for a long time into touch with his family. And maybe through our counseling skills, we will be able to help a parent to understand what has and to interpret the lifestyle, to help to bring about a reconciliation so that at least that child can be accepted back into the environment of the home.
Well, the program's been very good to me, you know. Especially we got beautiful staff here that they look after you, you know, beautiful, like if you're part of them. And since I don't have no family here, this is my family, you know. And you got beautiful people that really care about you. They go out all the way for you, you know. They help you out in every way.
the young mothers, women who are infected, will need a great deal of help in making plans for their children. They may need legal advice, they may need emergency housing, they may need transport to health care facilities. They are more at risk and they are less well served than, in general, the men who have AIDS. And I think it should be a special focus of the Salvation Army ministry to find out where the women and children are and what we can do for them.
From a practical standpoint, they're no different just because they have a disease. They want the same things that you and I want, and that's the practical things we have to do. They want to be able to go out and shop. They want to be able to buy a nice gift for their child. They want to be able to go, sightseeing or go, do some recreational thing. And those basic little things are the things that we can do with them that show them from a practical standpoint that we care about them.
Means that we can go to people who are hurting and lonely and alienated, and we can be the conveyors, we can be the means of expressions of love and reconciliation. We can make credible and present the love of Jesus. We might be the means by which people come to know Jesus at a time that they so desperately need to do so to be saved. I know that in New York City it's hard for many people in the gay community to find a funeral parlor to handle the arrangements with surrounding a funeral, or for a minister to come and to officiate at the funeral. And it's a tragedy because they so desperately need that. To say it again, everyone needs the love and grace of God, and so the Salvation Army needs to minister everywhere.
We all accept the call of Christ in our hearts to minister to those in need. But sometimes our humanity can get in the way, and our Lord understands. After all, didn't he look at his sleepy disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane and observe that the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak? The Apostle Paul tells us that Christ's strength is made perfect in our weakness. In the complex issue of AIDS, our human shortcomings are made all too evident. Only as we recognize them can they be overcome. Major Ted Arrowwood is the area commander in Miami.
When I first became involved in this, I was very reluctant because I was not educated. And when I began really reading and studying, and I became involved here locally in Miami with the South Florida AIDS Network and with the Health Crisis Network and with the United Way and various seminars and so forth, and I began to understand actually the disease, then it removed a lot of fears, and I think that could be an obstacle that we can overcome.
When you look at the whole problem of prejudice, it's based on what you don't know about a person. And to me, again, looking at that model of involvement, when you begin to know a person, not by identity in terms of what they do or what they don't do, but by name, by personality, by understanding where that person has come from, by some cause and effect in their lives, it's difficult for you then to see that person as, quotes, a person who is sexually active in what you term as deviance or whatever. But then later you see that person as Jim, who needs your support, or Susan, or someone who you've gotten to know as a person that happens to have problems. And these are some of the problems for you to work out.
I have to keep in mind that whether you're homosexual or heterosexual, you are a human being. You are created by God. And it's not the person, but the sin. And I don't want to neglect or discriminate against someone who needs the Lord.
We've said alcohol is wrong and gambling is wrong, but we've always worked with the alcoholic, trying to help that. So what's the big deal?
We have tended to be very condescending and very critical and judgmental about the backgrounds from which some of the people who get AIDS have come. That's a problem. Many alcoholics have tended to be, we have prided ourselves on taking care of the alcoholic who was once a banker, the alcoholic who was once the father of a happy family and lived in the suburbs, and we're going to rehabilitate him a little bit and send him right back there. The fact that we have somebody who's non-compliant and who is a more difficult person to work with has created some problems for us. But the fact that AIDS has changed our attitude toward persons might be because of our fear.
It's not an easy thing to watch somebody die and to have to deal with the pain that they're going through. So many times, you know, myself included, you know, people have asked me questions, and it's been, I haven't been able to answer them, and it's been real painful. And you want to avoid that for yourself. You know, you don't want to keep putting yourself in to that painful situation. You know, you don't want to watch people die. You don't want to do funeral after funeral after funeral. You don't want to have a 5-year-old little girl ask you, you know, why did God do this to my daddy? And, you know, so we put up roadblocks to stop ourselves from getting in those kinds of situations.
I'm not a professional in AIDS. I am a corps officer, a pastor of a group, and a head of a human service agency in town, all rolled up as the Salvation Army, and I'm nothing special. It's just a matter of spending some time educating, knowing where we're going, seeing this thing as in proper light. It is important. I'm not negating its importance, but it doesn't take any kind of special aura or special education. It just takes a little bit of a heart that cares.
Well, I think as a Salvation Army, if we're proclaiming, you know, that God loves people and that He came into the world to save those who are lost, then I feel, first of all, we need to educate ourselves enough to get over our own prejudices, to know what we're dealing with, to deal with it intelligently. And then as we get to know people on a one-to-one basis, I think we are able then to minister to them and to treat them as an individual who has an illness, and to treat them the way I personally would want to be treated if I were ill.
What I wish would happen is that people would see AIDS and our work with AIDS no different than, you know, the fact that we have a food pantry. No different than the fact that we have a day camp. In all of our programs, we're supposedly having a spiritual influence and a spiritual impact. And this is no different. People choose a lot of times to come to Salvation Army program because they know that there's a spiritual impact. And this should be no different. Our AIDS programs, whatever they are, people should know, well, geez, if I go there, they're going to talk to me about God because that's the Salvation Army. And hopefully that's what we're setting up here with that program.
And we are not only to open our doors to everyone who wants to come, we're thrust out. And that means we must go to people and we must offer to them every possible service, every possible resource that will make their lives better. That means that we're going to go to every kind of person, we're going to go to every kind of setting in order to help. We're going to go to the prison where there are AIDS patients who are sometimes being well taken care of and sometimes not, sometimes neglected, sometimes abandoned. And we're going to visit them, we're going to provide whatever social services we can, given the constraints that are imposed by the prison system. We're going to go to the places where the intravenous drug abuser may be. We're going to go to the place where mother and child at risk need help, need shelter, need support, social services, counseling, whatever kinds of services. We're going to go to the communities where young men have been abandoned because of their lifestyle. They put themselves at risk, they're infected, they're dying.
think of Christ and him touching the lepers. And in the same sense, I feel our mission is to provide that same type of devotion to God's people. If we're his ambassadors, then I think we follow his example.
People in the hospital who are dying of AIDS usually don't have people touch them.
I had no fear of placing my hand in the hand of an AIDS patient and pray with him. I would have no fear to place my arm on his shoulder and say, God loves you, and I love you, and I'm here to help you. We need not to be too overcautious because we would lose our purpose in ministering. But we need to use simple, good, common sense and a compassionate love, and when that happens, all fear is gone.
Certainly in any community there are a lot of AIDS patients in the hospitals. In the center of Ohio or Indiana, not that many yet. In northern New York there may not be many. But anyone around the urban centers, and the Salvation Army is strategically located in so many places where we can minister significantly to this problem. It will require that we ask questions, that we take initiative, that we find out certain things, that we find out what others are doing and what special needs remain, and we can certainly do that.
One of the things that I think the Salvation Army can do, one of the simplest programs we can offer, one of the least expensive programs, we don't need government grants or anything, is to set up a visitation program where we go to the apartment or go to the home and help the well people in the home so they can better care for those that are sick. And, you know, we talked before about just going in and maybe doing the dishes or spending a couple hours there so whoever's caring, the caregiver, can get a break.
Practical applications of the gospel. That's what it takes to deal with AIDS. But that's not all it takes.
If we're faithful and if we're obedient, that God will help us to do whatever he's called us to do. I'm sure that there are some people that can't do it to the extent that other people can do it. Like there are some people that wouldn't be able to handle going in every day and watching people die. And I understand that. But any of us can do a home visit and help take care of somebody in the house, or to even take care of the caregiver, the person that's well, and to help them. So is it a special group? Yeah, because of God's grace. But everybody is given God's grace. God's grace isn't conditional. So all of us can do something, and not to fall back on the excuse, well, I can't do this, this isn't really me. And I just think that if you're faithful and obedient, God will give you the grace to do what you can.